What's up, guys? Doug Polk here, and we're back for another episode of Poker Hands. But before we jump into that, I want to take a moment to talk about next week, Wednesday at 11 a.m. PST. I'm going to be doing a show with Joe Ingram 1, otherwise known as Pop B. It's going to be on Twitch, live streamed at Doug Polk Poker, and then we're going to be putting episodes alternating between my channel and his channel, so you can check out, what we talked about and what the episodes are. It's going to be a pardon the interruption style rundown. We're going to have a timer. We're going to discuss topics and whatever's going on in the poker community. It's going to be kind of like a news show, almost poker news like, but different with co-hosts instead of just me. So should be fun. Looking forward to it, and you guys should definitely check that out. Okay, so today we're going to be taking a look at Mark Newhouse's second World Series of Poker final table. He got 9th place in his first one, and I guess you guys are going to have to see how he does in the second one here today. On that note, let's go ahead and jump into the clip.
Raise 1.1 million.
And Van Hoof was at the back of the pack a few days ago. It wasn't as extreme as Greg Merson, who had less than 3 big blinds left, but he started day 5 with 13 big blinds. He was 282nd in chips out of 291.
Van Hoof with a raise, a call from Newhouse with pocket tens. Will talking now, and everybody has seen that when Will gets involved, Will is pretty serious about what he's got. And that face of Will Tonking is who Will Tonking is. He doesn't fool around. Pre-game interviews, he doesn't want to act as a poser. He doesn't want to try to offer any self-aggrandizement. He just, almost comes off like a working stiff. This is my game. I'm not doing anything special. But he does have the best hand right now with queens. So
yeah, Newhouse is in a really tough spot. I mean, he's on the button with 2 tens. He just flatted the original raiser, original raise from Van Hoof. So, when you have 2 tens to a single raise, you're definitely not getting away from it.
So that 2 minute take 100 back. Yep.
How much you start with, Mark?
22.
Our hand begins with Van Hoof opening it up with 8-7 off in the hijack. Now, look, I understand being the chip leader and willing to put some pressure on him, put him in a tough spot. But, dude, this is way too loose. I mean, you've got some reasonably large stacks behind you. 8-7 off is way too weak of a hand. I don't know if this was maybe something about not having opened in a while, but really, you want to be playing more conservative. If you want to mix it up, throw in a hand like 5-3 suited or 7-5 suited, or maybe, King 10 off, King Jack off. 8-7 off is way too weak, and you should be folding that in the hijack. Now it's over to Mark Newhouse in the cutoff with pocket tens. He really has 2 decisions here. He can either flat or he can 3-bet. Now, I think against more conservative players, flatting tens makes sense. I think against more aggressive players, 3-betting tens also makes sense. And being that we're seeing 8-7 off opened here, it's probably fair to say that this player's been opening pretty wide. So for those reasons, I kind of like a 3-bet, but I can totally get behind a call with the pocket tens. Now, over to the small blind, and Tonking has queens. Queens! Very strong hand here, no limit hold'em. He likes to 3-bet to 3.75 million, or really about 7.5 big blinds, which, I like the size. It makes a lot of sense. You're really denying the odds to call. And Van Hoof gets out of the way, and now Newhouse has a very clear call with pocket tens. Let's take a flop.
Here we go, queens against tens.
Not to mention the raise was from Tonking, which, should send off some worry bells for Newhouse, because Tonking, as we know, has played very solid so far. So as powerful as 2 tens are, you have to be cautious. But usually they're the best hand.
When I had pocket queens, it seems like put more kings and aces in the deck than ever before. And 2 or 3 of them hit the flop. But Tonking sees 3 undercards out there.
Bet 3.5.
So the only person that Newhouse might actually fold to is Tonking, because this is a pretty standard call on the flop in position just to see what your opponent does on the turn. You raise pre-flop, you bet the flop. There's a very reasonable chance he could have ace-queen or ace-king. I think against almost anyone else, he's always going to call here in position. But against Tonking, it's a whole different story. So far. I wouldn't be shocked if Newhouse found a fold here.
Call.
But
There's
pretty
a call.
standard.
Yep.
The flop comes Jack 4-2 rainbow. a very dry flop. Queens has to be happy that there's no ace or king on the flop, and tens have to be a little annoyed about a jack, but that said, it's not nearly as bad as a queen, king, or ace. The flop is bet by tonking 3.5 million. Seems reasonable. A smaller bet size makes sense here because there's so few hands that connect with this board. And now Newhouse has a clear call with pocket tens. He could beat hands like ace, king, queen, king, queen. His opponent could have maybe a suited connector kind of bluff. And maybe his opponent even would bet a hand like nines or eights on the flop, trying to get him to fold out some overcard equity. So very clear bet, very clear call. Let's see the turn.
Not afraid to put chips into the middle. Another 4 comes out.
Yeah, that's a great card for tonking. He's not really worried about a 4. So he loves his hand right now. You know, if you think your opponent called you with a very light hand and might bet the turn, you want to check here. But if you think your opponent called you with a hand like a jack, if you think he's going to bet the jack, you definitely want to bet. If you think he's the kind of player that could just check back and have pot control, which most cash game players do, then you obviously want to bet.
Check.
You hear Bruno's cheering section back there. They don't just sit back and wait for something to happen with their guy.
So I don't know what Newhouse is going to do here. You know, going through his mind is maybe tonking as ace, king, ace, queen. I don't want to let him catch up. So he might make a very small bet on the turn. If he bets, he's not going to bet big.
Was tonking just letting Newhouse hang himself here? Is that what the check was for?
Yeah, pretty much. He called him on the flop. He's just wants to fire. He just wants him to fire on the turn. You know, he's bet 25% of the pot. Not a massive bet.
Tonking can end it here if he wants to.
He could.
You guys can hear me?
But, you know, if you think your opponent is bluffing, you don't want to take that away from him on the river. But there's a lot of bad cards that can come out. So
sure.
4.5 million.
No, that isn't a massive bet by Newhouse, but this pot is starting to build.
Yeah, it's a tough spot here. I don't know what to do. You risk giving your chance a card that might make his hand. You know, if a jack peels off, if a heart peels off, if an ace or a king peels off, it's pretty gross. But you have a very strong holding, and you also, if you raise and get called or re-raised, you kind of have to go with it. So I like the call.
The turn is an offsuit for pairing the board, and now Tonking decides to check his queens, which I'm not really that big of a fan of. It's extremely unlikely that Newhouse has a hand with a 4 in it, because what 4 would call the open out of the cutoff and then also call the 3-bet? Sure, if he had a 4 in the flop, he'd be likely to call, but he's not really going to have many of those hands pre-flop, like maybe ace-4 suited, maybe 5-4 suited, but both those hands are pretty loose. Now, once he checks it over to Newhouse, I'm very confused. The turn pairs the board, and he decides to bet a really small amount. I wonder why he would do this.
He's reaching, and that is 200,000.
Poke just bet 10% of the pot on the turn. I don't understand the game of poker anymore, Lon.
Whoa. Anyway, even though I made a very similar play in that hand, this spot is quite different. In that spot, I would have a lot of aces in my range that can be value betting turn and betting the river as well. Here, the small bet doesn't make quite as much sense. He doesn't have any 4s in his range pre-flop, really, and so it doesn't really represent trips, or he doesn't really represent having improved here by betting the turn. For that reason, I would definitely want to check 10s back and look to play some rivers. I mean, if you bet here and get called, are you really happy with what's going on? I mean, maybe he has ace-king and bet flop and is going to check call the turn, getting very good odds. But maybe he just folds ace-king, ace-queen anyway, and you're only called when you're behind. That makes me not only like to bet 10s here. In fact, a pretty good general rule would be don't bet hands where if they call, you're always behind, especially if you have a hand that has some showdown value. It doesn't really make as much sense to bet. So I would have liked to seen a check back here on the turn by Newhouse, but we do see a bet and a call. Let's take the river.
Another dime doesn't go into this pot.
That's a terrible card for tonking.
Another jack, a double paired board. And
Check.
he's got to think, you know, if Mark's around, Mark's got a piece of the board somewhere, and Mark now has a really big piece of the board.
I mean, Newhouse could definitely have a jack in his hand. So even
all in from Newhouse, and if he's called,
By the way, this is not a value bet from Newhouse. He's bluffing here. He knows he's bluffing. He knows that once Tonking called him on the turn, it's very possible for Tonking to have an overpair.
Tonking has the bigger stack. A call here means Mark Newhouse once again would be out in 9th place.
The river is an offsuit jack, and this is where the hand gets really weird. Tonking has queens and is definitely not happy to see this river. Now ace jack, king jack suited, queen jack suited, jack 10 suited, all improved the top boat. And Newhouse should be somewhat glad that this river came, because now his opponent is less likely to have a jack and have him beat. Where the hand gets really weird, though, is when Tonking checks over to Newhouse. Newhouse now elects to go all in. And I have to wonder why. You have so many other worse hands here that you might want to bluff with. What if you had a hand like ace-queen that you floated the flop and now are going to bluff with? Or maybe a hand like sixes, or, you know, ace-5 suited, or really any of these hands. There's so many other hands you could decide to bluff with here that I don't see why you have to pick tens. Tens is so strong compared to all of your hands that you have in this spot. In fact, if you don't have top boat, tens is the next best hand, because you're going to be three-betting hands like queens to aces pre-flop, and you're not really going to have a hand like a 4 in it. I guess, you know, you will occasionally have a hand like 2-2 or 4-4, but those are going to be rare compared to all of the pairs that you could have in this situation. So I'm not a big fan of deciding to go all in as Newhouse here. It doesn't really make that much sense to me. Going back over to Tonking spot with queens, he now has a pretty difficult decision. His opponent can easily have a hand like ace-jack, king-jack suited, queen-jack suited, jack-10 suited. All of these hands have improved. However, because you have queens, queen-jack suited is now significantly less likely. But the most important card here, I think, really is, well, other than a jack, obviously, is having an ace, because your opponent can have all ace-jacks. You know, it would be very reasonable to call the open with ace-jack and 3-bet with ace-jack. Again, wanting to play in position with a hand that can make some pretty good top pairs. So you have to be a little bit worried in Tonking's shoes that your opponent does have top boat. But if he thinks his opponent is going to turn too many hands into bluffs here representing top boat, he can call kind of easily. Because if you think about it, there's not really that many jacks in Newhouse's range. You know, he has jack 10 suited, queen jack suited, king jack suited. Because there's 2 jacks on the board, that's really only 4 or 5 hands. Also, while he could have ace-jack, that's still only 8 hands as well. So Newhouse really only has room to bluff with maybe 1 or 2 of his pocket pairs. And if he's going to bluff, you know, pairs that are too high up, he's going to quite quickly bluff too much. Remember, on the river, you want to make your opponent indifferent between calling and folding. So if you're going to have, in this spot, you're going to have about half pot. Your opponent's going to get 3-1 to call. So you have to have 3 value bets for every 1 bluff. This is some advanced stuff here, guys. So Newhouse needs to be a little more careful with which pairs he decides that he wants to bluff with. He should probably bluff with some worse hands rather than tens and just check his tens back and take a showdown. Also, tens could win. His opponent could have ace-king, ace-queen, maybe even a hand like king-queen with hearts or something like that and decide to check call the turn. So there's certainly some hands that he will be beating here with pocket tens. Is it that likely? No, and I think some of these hands will fold the turn. But at the same time, he shouldn't be betting his tens here because it's too high up in his range. So back over to Tonking, he has queens, and what's he going to do?
And that's what you have to do to win at No Limit Hold'em. This is, and the fact that if he gets called, he's out 9th place, which is what happened last year. I mean, this is a lot of heart right here, guys. So
Tonking knows all that. He calls, and that's going to do it.
It doesn't seem possible.
Oh my goodness! Back-to-back final tables, back-to-back 9th place finishes for Mark Newhouse.
Wow, wow, wow.
What a call, and what devastation again for Mark Newhouse.
Will Tonking somehow found it inside himself to make that call that eliminates Mark Newhouse in 9th place, and Will Tonking is the chip leader. Mark Newhouse, deja vu all over again.
I think we have to give a little credit to Tonking because it's easy when you're the one watching the hand. You can be like, he has tens, call. But this was actually a very tough call to make and ended up putting him in a pretty good position in the tournament. Now, he didn't win the main, of course, but he definitely showed that he knew what his opponent was up to, made the right decision, and essentially doubled up his stack. Thanks for joining me here for this episode of Poker Hands, and I'll see you next week. This town is big enough for the both of us. Click that sub button.